Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of DIB Innovators. Today I'm speaking with Will Edward, founder and CEO of Firehawk. Will, thanks for joining today.
Appreciate you having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Oh, this will be great. And I think, what you're doing and how you're tackling it is pretty special. So let's just start off with tell us about your founder story. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you decided to found, Firehawk and go for it.
Yeah, for this space, I think I have a unique background, very unimpressive background when it comes to aerospace and defense. I got my finance degree from the University of Arkansas. I graduated in 2015. Yeah, whoop pig sooie. We need all the fans we can get right now when it comes to football. We're great at basketball and track and field, but football needs some help. But yeah, so when I was there, I actually created a software for my fraternity to help everyone learn each other's names. And I went to law school briefly after college. And when I was in law school, that software, that fraternity software I created for, it was like electronic flashcards and quizzes to learn people's names, just a gamification of directory. I had a lot of people reach out to me and say, hey, I could use this for my new, colleagues at their first job that they had. So I ultimately dropped out of law school, moved the company to St. Louis, moved it over to Santa Monica, and built an HR software to help people learn the names of their coworkers. And it really became an API, easy to plug in, didn't need to maintain it whatsoever. And during that time, I got to meet a lot of interesting people, learn about startups. This was back in like 2018. And during, all these meetings and everyone I was meeting with, I really was working with one of these guys I've known for 2 decades, Ron Jones, who was printing rocket fuel for hybrid rocket engines out of thermoplastic. And my dad is the guy who brought us all together. My dad was Senator Inhofe, who was the former chairman of Armed Services Chief of Staff way back in the late 80s, early 90s. So Ron was trying to get his company off the ground, and he, came to me and asked for advice on fundraising, which, to be quite frank, I did not know much about. My last company raised about $250,000, if even. And you know, choose the markets we're going to go after. He wanted to build a space company, but we decided let's build a defense company instead. So we built a defense company. I went and, hired our first few people. We raised a couple $100,000, and that was the beginning of Firehawk, all in 2019, 2020. Really got started in 2020.
Very cool. And what was your mission at that point? Like what were you trying to do? Well, what problem were you solving?
The problem we were solving now initially it was let's take this hybrid rocket engine and let's see if we can integrate it into, some sort of rocket or munition. And we were able to get a phase 3 contract with the Army. We were able to, get some appropriations to start really developing this motor, which we were testing at Stennis Space Center at the time. In about 2021, we moved to Texas. And so it was can we disrupt the solid rocket motor supply chain with a hybrid rocket engines? Because, when it comes to producing a rocket, the hard part about producing a rocket is producing the motor. Hard part about producing the motor is producing the propellant. And we thought we had an easy button for that with hybrids. Now, as we started to work on these rocket variants with the Army, we learned we can't disrupt the supply chain by introducing, a half solid, half liquid rocket to these defense systems. We have to be able to provide them exactly what they're used to integrating into their rockets, but we have to do it a little differently. So what we did over a couple of years was we took this hybrid rocket fuel, which is essentially just Lego plastic, and we started to incorporate energetics into it. Like we got to the point where we were printing with ammonium perchlorate. We're making this, fully highly loaded propellant grains. And so while we were thinking we were going to introduce hybrid rocket fuel and motors to the defense industry as a replacement to solid rocket motors, what we really did was we found a way to 3D print highly loaded solid rocket propellant and then just build solid rocket motors. And the reason that's important is because it takes 60 days to produce rocket propellant. And we've cut that down to 6 hours. We don't need a $1 billion facility. We're going to be able to do this, in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds out of a facility in Oklahoma that cost just about $20 million.
Man. That's pretty significant. Well, give me some like basic physics of, solid rocket propellant and then how you're bringing in Lego material effectively, or what you were doing. But how is that different? Like what are what's the key there? And how did you learn this? Your law degree probably didn't really bring you up to speed on this.
Dropped out of law school. I didn't
You're
I was
supposed
there just short enough to get the money I paid for on, like, books back, so, that was nice, but, yeah, so right now today, how you produce rocket propellant is you have these giant mixers, and these mixers are, in these huge facilities hidden, in the hills, and they mix all the ingredients. They're HTPB, which is the binder, and they, mix the ammonium perchlorate and everything else that goes into propellant for about 12-ish hours. Now all of a sudden you have about 5,000 pounds of rocket propellant, and you've added this curing agent, so it starts to solidify. So now you have this huge vat of essentially explosives that you then, if you're lucky, you're just pouring that into one massive motor. But for these defense applications, what they have is hundreds of molds that they then have to carefully pour this mixed propellant into each of these molds before it solidifies into the mixer. So that's an incredible operation in itself. And then once they're in those molds, they get pushed into an oven to cure for, again, several days. So it's about, like I said, 15 to 60 days to produce propellant, and the same thing for base bleeds. Base bleeds are these small motors for artillery shells, really small, so you're really having to deal with tiny molds for the cast and cure process. What Firehawk's been able to do is we use a machine called the twin screw extruder. That twin screw extruder essentially melts all of the ingredients, and instead of using a thermoset polymer HTPB, we use a thermoplastic, and it essentially just extrudes long spaghetti strands and then it cuts them up into pellets. So now we have our mixture, our form of what would exist in that giant mixer, that vat, except instead of being in this gelatinous form, it's in the form of pellets, and I have no pot life. What I do is I can take it to a commercial off-the-shelf printer, and instead of using molds, I can essentially print it, extrude it into the shape of the desired grain for whatever system I'm doing. So now something that would require dozens of engineers to manage has essentially just been automated to a twin screw extruder spitting out these pellets and a 3D printer deciding what grain does it want to print, and essentially cures instantaneously. So we've cut out the whole, molds, expensive, oven, expensive. It's just, dump some pellets into your 3D printer and print the desired grain, and then stick that into the motor that it's going in for the rocket system of your choice.
Wow. And so were there any big lessons learned in this, or was it are your customers like, "Oh, I get it," and they're like, "Let's go."
I mean, yeah, the lessons learned is people aren't always excited about bringing some form of innovation to the defense industry. So when we said we're going to 3D print rocket propellant, you know, they're like, listen, we've done this in the past. People have tried this in the past. It doesn't work. We don't want to touch this. We're not even going to look at you. And so what we had to do is really just, without any, initial support on this, film ourselves out in, my team took a small 3D printer, like a $5,000, $10,000 3D printer, out to our test site in Midland, Texas. We filmed ourselves printing the propellant, sticking that grain into a small test motor, and then testing it, and then collecting the data. And then we shared it with these folks in the government, and they were really impressed with what they saw. So that backlash still continues as we make more progression. People say, oh, this has been done before, we're not interested. But we're also finding people on the other side who are very enthusiastic about what we're doing. But what I think the most important lesson we learned is don't disrupt the supply chain. Don't go to the military and say, hey, all those solid rocket motors you're using right now, we're going to replace them with hybrid rocket engines. That doesn't work. You need to produce something that is essentially an easy swap for what they're already using. Just make it faster and cheaper somehow, and that's really what Firehawk focused on.
And what do you think, right now, even today, the one thing most people misunderstand about rocket propulsion that impacts our defense readiness?
Honestly, just that it's hard to make. Like like the way Northrop Grumman and L3 Harris are producing propellant is extremely hard, but they're also some of the best in the world at doing it. You're not going to just stand up a facility and say, hey, I'm going to start making rocket propellant like the primes. I mean, Northrop's invested over $1 billion just in improving their current operations for making propellant. They have found out how to do it the way they do it almost better than anyone else. So that's really difficult. It's a just because they're behind doesn't mean they're bad at what they're doing. It's just an unbelievably difficult process. And how it affects defense is I'm always confused when I see new companies come out and say, I'm going to build, this new type of missile. That's great, but, like, how are you gonna produce the rocket motor? How are you gonna produce the propellant? Because if you go to Northrop Grumman or L3 Harris, they're gonna be excited, but you're not coming to them with an order for, 6,000 of them like Lockheed and Raytheon are. You're gonna be way behind in that queue and probably won't get a motor at scale. So, I think it's a variety of things that, 1, propellant's hard to produce, rocket motors are hard to make, and 2, when you see slowness in the defense industry, it's just because these things are difficult to produce, and if you don't have the ability to produce motors, propellants, seekers, whatever, faster and better than what's already out there today, you're not gonna really make a difference, and I think the startup world's gonna learn that slowly.
Yeah, we all often see. It'll be curious to see how it works out with like Andreol. A lot of great prototypes, but they haven't produced at scale for a while or ever. They may have some, or that is what the primes are good at. They can produce at scale quickly. And so it'll be interesting, to your point of where the startups are going to challenge, listening or finding that out.
Absolutely, and, Anduril's still pretty darn young company. They're finding their footing, and Anduril more than likely will make it big. If they don't make it big because of what Anduril did, I think there are going to be some other one-off companies that had the opportunity to build a business because of what, investors saw Anduril doing, and
Right.
they will make it big. So I'm excited to see what the ripple effect is too, in both good and bad ways.
Yeah, no, I mean, they've definitely helped break the paradigm with, primes owning everything. So it's a cool time to be in defense tech for sure. So what do, you got natural competitors that you're pushing into this space. How are you seeing their response? Are they trying to do what you're doing? Because I imagine you already mentioned the time frame to produce. It sounds like it's pretty easy to scale. And I've got to imagine your cost is way less.
Cost is significantly cheaper. I mean, when we're talking about what we're doing with base bleeds alone for artillery shells, we're taking like a 6-week process down to just 30 plus seconds. It's unbelievable the scale that we're going to see when Firehawk opens up its Oklahoma propellant production facility, rocket motor facility, base bleed facility. It's all going to be on that one area. It's 340 acres of production. Now, when it comes to competitors, a lot of them have their own focus areas. But no, none of them are 3D printing propellant. It's interesting to see, and it makes sense because maybe that's just not the piece they're looking to innovate on, but they're all doing it the traditional way, mixing and casting. Now, I think there's a lot of money to be made in this industry, even if you're doing the old way of producing propellant and rocket motors. But I said before, I would close our doors before I would become a company that mixes and casts and cures rocket propellant, because I would be no better than a subsidiary of L3 or Northrop. I would be adding no value to this industry, and it just doesn't make sense. I want to see Firehawk make a pretty phenomenal dent in the propellant and production and rocket motor space. Otherwise, we're just wasting people's time. I have a lot of very smart people who should just go work at primes if we're not going to do that. However, they've done that. They've produced it. We know how to do it. We're scaling it. I think it's going to be pretty phenomenal to see what Firehawk does over the next 5 years because of how cheap it is for us to produce this stuff and how quickly we can produce it.
Yeah, flex. I mean, 3D printing that stuff is fantastic. I mean, how cool. You know, if someone brings a new weapon or a new, rocket motor that they need help with, you're like, yeah, we're there.
Yeah, exactly. Like we can design a dozen new formulations or produce a dozen new formulations of propellant in a day. Obviously, we'd go through all the proper tests and safety and everything you have to do, but it's exciting, and that's why with this Oklahoma facility and what we have going on in Texas, we bought a facility in Mississippi. We bought a 636-acre rocket production facility where we'll be able to produce at scale, 10,000 systems a month just out of this one facility. So, and we have room to grow there too. We have bunkers, we have integration facilities, we have office space already. So we're excited about what we're doing, but all of this is possible for us because we focused on the material science of things at first. Firehawks decided we're going to fundamentally change how you produce rocket propellant, starting at with the binder and base bleeds. I can't leave out base bleeds. It's too big of an opportunity. But we became a material science company, and just by changing how we produce those propellants allows us to actually produce motors at scale, actually integrate those motors into rockets that we produce at scale, and actually produce base bleeds for artillery shells at scale. And just by focusing on, those three things, we're talking billions of dollars in potential revenue over the years. It's really exciting, and I mean, I'm pumped, and my team's pumped. 2026 will be fun year.
Heck yeah. How is the war in Ukraine shaped? Because there's obviously a lot of rockets and munitions, the core of that combat or conflict regarding like distributed production, supply chain resilience, things like that. Have you taken lessons learned from that? And, do you see Firehawk being able to capitalize on those?
Yeah, artillery is king. Russia shot 14 million shells at Ukraine in about a year. It's just unbelievable, the amount of rockets that they just need. We're not talking about smart weapons, like, we're not talking about missiles, just rockets is unbelievable. So Firehawk is forming partnerships with phenomenal companies, industry leaders like CSG in Europe or Hanwha in South Korea, where we can go in and stand up a facility for base bleeds or for rocket motors or propellant and produce at scale, not really on the battlefield. I don't know how much that makes sense, but at least a few hundred miles or a country or two away, not an ocean away, but a country or two away, and actually start producing at scale for what's happening in Ukraine or for whatever may happen in the Pacific with our foreign allies, or even just in, Indo-PACOM with the United States. We see ourselves producing miniature factories all over the world for these systems.
How's from the explosive perspective? Is there a difference in the way current, you know, rocket propulsion fuel is being, made as we've talked about? Is there a different because you're able to put in pellets and then 3D print it? You don't have to go through the curation as you've talked about. Is there a difference in kind of the explosive concerns and managing, or is it about the same?
It's about the same, and we're getting the same specific impulse. We're looking to meet performance, the basic performance metrics required. That was really important to us. So we played around with different oxidizers, but we knew we weren't being completely serious with our formulations until we started to introduce ammonium perchlorate as our oxidizer, our energetic. So still very, very explosive. Got to take that seriously. But we're hitting the right specific impulse. We're able to produce fully loaded grains. There are no concessions that have to be made with the Firehawk propellant. When it comes to the 3D printing, though, it does allow us to make really unique shapes without expensive instrumentation. So we're gonna look and see how much improvement we can get by changing the design of these grains, internally. And at the same time, we're excited to see what it's like to print propellant using multiple fuel variations. You can stick different multiple extruders onto a 3D printer and have them print the pellets that are different formulations at the same time. So that can change the thrust profile mid-burn of a particular system without getting too intricate. So I think there are a lot of improvements to be made to what we're working on, and we're never going to quit our R&D and improving the propellant and the production.
Are you finding unique things with some of these startups that are creating, look at, mass, I would say, mass scale production of cruise missiles, for example, cheap cruise missiles, on the affordable side. Are they coming to you because of your ability to do this, or are you seeing kind of that traction from the startup community and the defense tech side yet?
I don't really know anyone who's making mass-produced cruise missiles. So
I'll share a name with you.
we're really excited about our focus as a company has been let's work with the people who can provide us a scaled, a contract at scale. So whether that's working on the right, government owned system, or if that's working with, some of our current partners, and we're going to be announcing more partners today, but the same amount of effort that we would put into like a startup, even a startup that's raised like 50 to $100 million to build them 5 prototypes and qualify that, we could put that effort into a company that's already doing $20 billion in revenue and have a real contract at the end of it. So we're always happy to work with these different partners when it comes to some of these other contracts we're working on that are more R&D side to see what we both can do together. But our focus has really been scale. How can we get to that point where out of our Mississippi facility, we're producing, you know, 1,000 systems a month by 2027 and 10,000 in 2028.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, you mentioned some foreign countries that you're involved with. Is that different? And you also you had a recent funding round. I think you had a European VC, defense prime tied in together. How do you think that's changing kind of defense innovation funding and where it can go?
Yeah, listen, if your systems are going to be fielded potentially on foreign soil, you better get a partner over there that knows what's going on every single day. So, yeah, we follow all the ITAR rules. No one's sitting on our board. No one has, a board advisor seat or holds 10% of the company, obviously. But we're excited to work with them because they have made meaningful investments into our company. And we want to build what's being used overseas. So, one of the issues I have with American defense tech is people are building their toys or their systems in, the United States out of their really nice offices with their cool, they have on their decks all their really cool VCs that have invested in them. They have kombucha and iced coffee and all this shit. But like, the systems that are actually like working are the ones being built over in Europe and being battle tested. And whatever these American companies get built within, actually produce and can maybe produce at scale, whatever scale means to the startup world, it's going to be outdated within 6 months. And Europe's going to be 6 months ahead of them. So we really focused on finding a great European VC firm as well as that's connected to a European defense giant that can make sure we're building with them for what their customers need. We're not going to come to them with a new idea and be like, I can save your life. I thought of it while I was watching Love is Blind on Netflix while you guys were fighting in a war, but it's this new drone that's going to really change the game. We're not going to do that. We're going to listen to what they need and, just build it. I was a little unhinged going straight to Netflix Love is Blind, but I actually have a story about someone who's like, one of my greatest ideas came from Love is Blind. And it's like
So you've raised capital. How much capital have you raised now?
about $100 million, a little bit more.
And that's this last round is really how do you get from kind of your R&D side to scale? Is that what you're going to be able to scale that, through your plants and production? Is that
Yeah, absolutely. So with that round of funding, we've been able to expand to Oklahoma. We've expanded to Alabama and Mississippi. Firehawk is, we're producing something that's existed for decades. We're producing rockets, producing centuries, rocket motors, we're producing propellant, and we're producing base bleeds for artillery shells. Again, we just changed how that same thing is produced. We're changing, we're improving by a few degrees how something at the core of the industrial base works, defense industrial base works. And so once we proved that out with a relatively small team, just dozens of people were able to create this new technology. Now we're spending money on just scaling it up so that we can start stamping out 200,000 base bleeds a year out of Oklahoma, hundreds of thousands of propellant, thousands of rocket motors, and then get Mississippi up and running to where we're doing 10,000 rockets a month out of there.
that's great. What with this, what's the biggest challenge you see coming up that kind of keeps you up at night? The potential roadblocks or things that are blocking you or concerns of whatever. What is that?
You know, it'd be great if there weren't any government shutdowns. That'd be nice. That's not going to stop us. We have a lot of partners overseas that we get to work with. My VP of Fed, she said it's worse than not winning a contract is winning a contract and not delivering on that contract. So what we're investing this money and future dollars that we raise is that we're hiring the best people, giving them the best equipment, and giving them all the resources they need to execute on whatever contract we're given by the government. It's, we take it really seriously at Firehawk. It's a mission to, if the government is entrusting us with money to produce something, we're going to make that work. We're going to produce it as quickly as possible and to our standards, which are extremely high. It's not just something exciting that we can tweet about. So we want to see America be in a strong position. We want our allies to be in a strong position, and we want to play a role in that. So what keeps me up at night is we're getting a lot of contracts. I want to make sure we execute on them. That's a must happen for every single one of them.
Yeah, deliver to the warfighter for sure. So in this entrepreneurial journey, a very unique background. Now, what are some of the biggest lessons learned that you've come up with? How to do this?
Relationships are key. I mean, I've had investors that passed on the first couple rounds of Firehawk that ended up investing down the road because I was just able to build a strong relationship. Don't burn bridges, although I've burnt a few bridges. And then, the other lesson on side of like have good relationships and don't burn bridges is sometimes burn a bridge. Like get people out of your life because there are a lot of interesting folks in this industry. And I know it's like this in all startup industries, but there are a lot of people who are just here for the money grab and they're not looking at things the right way. They don't care about if the company scales and actually becomes profitable. They care about what those first 5 to 6 years of markups look like, how big that valuation can get, and then they can disappear. So we decided a bit ago, like you know, Firehawk's going to get to 9 figures in revenue within the next few years, and that's the mission. If we can do that, then we can sustain ourselves. We can grow to $1 billion in revenue. We can start buying companies, but this isn't something that I'm looking to just sell immediately to the most interested buyer, whoever comes along, if they do come along. We're going to build something that we think will last for decades and decades and, can really become a multi-deca billion-dollar company and not just off of vibes, but off of revenue. So don't take people seriously and burn that bridge if you have to. Just cut them out of your life. It's too short.
Yeah. So in 10 years, you kind of went through that, but what do you see, you're going to be well past 9 figures. Any other big innovation spaces you're pushing into, or is it really just scaling and maximizing, what you're currently doing?
I think that it's you're doing a disservice if you start, especially at our stage, if you start looking at how I'm gonna conquer the world of defense. I mean, Lockheed and Raytheon and Boeing and Northrop and all these other companies that can do that because they've already achieved, tens of billions of dollars of annual revenue, and that just makes sense for them. Firehawk's sole mission is to make rockets, rocket motors, and propellant abundant and to do it cost effectively. So I can't tell you. I know that there's billions of dollars to be made just on those three opportunities right there. And we're going to achieve that. As we go down the road, I do see ourselves making strategic acquisitions, whether if that's something that's like that'll help us produce propellant and base bleeds more effectively, or if it's us entering a new piece of the market. I don't know. All I can tell you is in 10 years, Firehawk will be known as the company that changed how rocket propellant is produced, which changed how rocket motors are produced, which changed how rockets and missiles are produced. And we'll be proud of that because I think that'll make a big impact on the industry and make a lot of money for those who invested in us and the employees who have spent years of their lives working many, many hours to make this a reality.
How do you keep internally, your employees aligned, you're very mission focused, like, is that a challenge to keep them innovative, but producing it, always sustaining high quality, execution? Because you can't screw something up with this, you've got to always deliver to your point. Talk to me a little bit about your culture and how you drive that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to know what my employees think of my all hands. I read a lot of books or honestly watch a lot of movies, but I like to draw inspiration from just things I read or see or watch. And I love turning that into some sort of all hands, twice a month that resonates to Firehawk. But I started that when we were about a 10-person company, and we've just grown and grown. We always had to get into bigger rooms as it kept growing. But what I noticed is, when we were a 10-person company, I wasn't traveling all that much. We didn't have the money to travel, and we didn't have the need to travel. We had to focus on what we were building. We had to get these tests done. We had to get the propellant formulated, you name it. Now I think I took like 140 flights last year. So I'm rarely in the office. But when I come back, I learn something new on what my team wants to do. And it's not some pie in the sky pivot. It has something to do with what we're working on with our foundational technology of the thermoplastic energetics, but it's a whole new opportunity. Like, for example, base bleeds. I mean, we learned that mid last year that we could produce this needed component. So I don't know, maybe they get a good laugh at these all hands I give them, and then that resonates down the road, but I just think I work with an innovative, motivated bunch who are excited about what they're doing, and they have incredible skill sets. We've been lucky to hire from companies like Lockheed and Raytheon and Northrop Grumman, and you name it, and these people are just unbelievable.
So give me a quick overview of something interesting that you gave at your all hands that was inspired.
There's this guy named Timothy Dexter who's a true psychopath, and he wrote a book called A Pickle for the Knowing Ones. Listen, this guy was always doing things that no one thought would work out. Like, and he would do things where ultimately the initial idea was just absolutely ridiculous. Like, he kind of grew up very, very poor, and he didn't know that the Caribbean was very hot. And one time a guy told him, "Hey, you should try to, if you want to start a business, you should send bed warmers to the Caribbean." He was like, "Oh, okay." And he put all of his money into sending bed warmers down to the Caribbean. Well, they're like, "What the hell are we going to do with this?" Turns out they made great mixers for molasses. So while no one ever needed to heat their bed with a bed warmer, they needed to mix the molasses, and it was phenomenal for that, and he made a fortune off of that. Another time, there's this old saying where it's like, doing this is the equivalent of, like, doing this is like selling, ice to an Eskimo. It was a piece of England where it's like, back in the day, they would say, doing that's like selling coal to this town in England, which was the biggest coal exporter in the world. So he's like, "Oh, wow. I need to sell coal to this region of England. I'm gonna do that." He sent boats over there, and again, there's people sort of making fun of him. Well, while the boats were shipping coal to a place that had an abundance of coal, strikes happened and all the coal factories shut down, and he became the equivalent of a billionaire because he was the only guy shipping coal into England for a while, and he was just ready to take all the business. So that's hysterical. Sometimes it's like Ulysses S. Grant, great quotes from that. And then another one that I keep on my board, I read 1776, and when Washington was about to fight the English, and this was when Firehawk, we never had that huge round until recently, that $60 million. So we're always doing everything off of, barely breathing gasps of air to try to get this technology to work. 3 weeks runway. I'm promising we're gonna make your payroll. But Washington, when he first took over the armies, he said that he had enough gunpowder for 9 bullets per soldier. So that's pretty scary when you have the greatest force in the world sailing your way to essentially kill you and all of your friends and take back this land. And he had a bunch of derelict farmers and barely enough supplies to fight them, and yet he still won because he just persisted. Had got very lucky, but just things like that.
Yeah, and the whole startup of just being gritty and grinding with, trying to keep it cheap. It's not easy.
Yeah, but you have to. The guy I can relate to the most, obviously, outside. I'm no U.S. Grant or George Washington, but I think Timothy Dexter is doable. I was walking around to all these conferences with Lego plastic fuel, saying, "Guys, we can turn this into a real product in the industry," and everyone laughed at that, did not take it seriously. Lo and behold, this ABS thermoplastic ended up being a great binder for solid propellant and made us the company that can 3D print rocket propellant. It was sitting in our hands all along. It just took us enough time of trial and error, being told what people want, what they don't want, to see this was the key all along. We were just building it in the wrong way.
It's fantastic. All right, so we're gonna go to, as we start to close this up. You've heard it lightning round, but I'm just gonna give you 5 quick questions. Give me about 30 seconds to a minute each one. Fast, raw, no perfect answers. Just get it out there. So, first one, and you may have already kind of answered this, so just give me another. You can just summarize it real quickly. So, what's the biggest myth or misconception about selling to the DoD?
Oh gosh, biggest myth or misconception? That the primes are dumb. You're not gonna just walk in there and say, "Hey, I'm gonna outproduce the primes because they're not producing anything," and just be the next SpaceX because I've hired these incredible folks. Like, the interesting thing about space is they really were just producing one-offs when they were with NASA and just like ULA. Elon came in and created SpaceX, a company with a vision of, let's build 1,000 to 10,000 starships a year and do hundreds and hundreds of launches per year. That was new to the industry. The primes, they produce 6,000 Gimlers a year. They produce thousands and thousands of these very intricate, very big systems and are incredible at that. You're not going to come in and just be like, listen, I got this SpaceX guy, I got this Tesla gal. I'm going to engineer my way into producing the Standard Missile 6 better than what they would. That's not going to happen. And you're not going to impress the government by saying that. You have to fundamentally change something at the core of the supply chain to actually be able to make that kind of difference.
All right. What's the hardest lesson you've learned in building a defense company?
Oh gosh, hardest lesson I've learned. Fundraising is hard. Fundraising is really, really hard. We started fundraising before Ukraine and then before Israel, obviously. Now fundraising is not so difficult for our company because we got that traction, but I did not realize that it would be that hard to raise money for a defense fund. And I think that was, or for a defense company. That was lucky. But also looking at my background, law school dropout, HR software, finance grad from the University of Arkansas. I think I checked zero of the boxes to make it happen. But one skill set that I did have was I want to hire the best. And it took me a long time to hire the best because people can sell themselves in this industry. And it takes a little bit of time to realize if they're full of it or not. And I did fall down that road a couple of times. But I was always welcome to hiring the best and listening to what they had to do. And once we got that snowball going, oh, things got way, way better, way easier.
That's good. That's great. Number one piece of advice you'd give someone starting a defense tech company.
Do not go in there thinking I'm going to change the supply chain. I'm going to build something absolutely new and extraordinary that will revolutionize the way we fight wars. That doesn't happen. And unless you're going to do that, be ready to raise billions of dollars before you really get started. So, yeah, just build something simple. I mean, there's so many companies out there that no one's ever heard of in the defense space. But honestly, a lot of them haven't even raised any money that are doing billions of dollars a year. They're 100% owned, or they have 3 or 4 owners by the operators. And these guys, they're delivering useful products and they're set for life. So you're not going to sell something that's just absolutely game changing, Call of Duty warfare, modern warfare, whatever. Just produce something simple that is needed.
Perfect. What trend in defense tech are you betting on that others are missing?
3D printed rocket propellant. And we're winning. Like, we're starting to win that fight. We have all these, the generals are on board. We got Congress on board. We got investors on board. My team, thankfully, is very much on board, and they're the ones who are really making things happen. So we believe we can make 3D printed rocket propellant the industry standard. And that's going to allow us, again, to make rocket motors, to make base bleeds for artillery shells, to make rockets, and maybe one day make full missiles.
This is just a follow on to that. Just I think it's fascinating. But which customer set, be it country, person, position, early on saw it and was the biggest believer, and now who is that? What group or person is like, this is it. This is the future.
We have a few of those, and it'd be hard to just pick one to be honest, because we do, we have found ourselves in the last 12 months really, and it's because we did our work. We have years and years of work to back up what we're claiming we can do. So it's no longer we think, it's we can, and that's won a lot of people over. But the group that I'm always grateful for is Army Futures Command, an Army application lab. They came to me and they said, listen, we want rocket motors and we want a diversified supply chain of these motors and the propellant for these 3 different variants. And they were like Stinger class, Javelin class, and GMLRS class. And they gave me a phase 3 contract. And when we were working on hybrid rocket engines for them, they allowed me to pivot. When I came to them, I said, I know we're months into this and we're designing this with hybrids, but we just we just created this solid propellant that's 3D printable. Can we swap out the Javelin and Stinger class systems with our new propellant? And they said, absolutely. And we're going to continue to work with them for many more years. So I'm so grateful to Dr. Purley and Army Application Labs and everyone at Army Futures Command for that.
That's great. And last lightning question, where do you think the biggest opportunities in defense are right now?
I think it's in, well, listen, there's a lot of things going on, like testing software is unbelievable opportunity. Software is great. I'm really focused on the hardware side. I think on the hardware side, it's figuring out how to mass produce, for lack of a better word, dumb systems, point and shoot systems. We need that. We need a lot of that. We need a lot of artillery shells. We need a lot of rockets. We need a lot of motors and propellant for this thing. So essentially what Firehawk is working on, but just creating something that is not too intricate that the military will buy hundreds of thousands of per year. Every system that Firehawk works on, like we're working on them because we know the government needs 300,000 of them at least per year. And so we're really focused on that. And I think the companies who come in, and obviously we can't do all of that yet or for many years. Hopefully one day we are dynasty that does everything. But I believe there's a lot of money to be made in just producing artillery shells, producing rockets, producing the simple systems and all the components that go on those systems, nozzles, you name it.
Fantastic. Well, Will, this has been a hoot. I love what you guys are doing. I love your approach. I love your background. I'm in cybersecurity and I flew fighter jets. I mean, there we go.
You should have seen Y Combinator's face when I did the interview process, and I was like, "Yeah, finance degree from the University of Arkansas." They were like, "No, thanks."
Like you can stop now. I don't even care what you came up with. No, so good. And I look forward to, continuing both our relationship, but, watching you guys continue to dominate this market. If folks want to follow you guys and just see how it's going, how best to do that?
I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. Yeah, follow Firehawk on LinkedIn. Our Twitter page can use some help. We don't have the same following on Twitter. So if
I
you
don't think
follow,
defense tech does. We don't either. Like cyber, there is one, but
but LinkedIn, I love LinkedIn. That's fun. And if anyone ever wants to come by, print some propellant, if you're an American citizen, and check out our headquarters, if it makes sense, reach on out to my email. I'm just, Will at firehawkaerospace.com.
fantastic. So much fun. I look forward to seeing you around, buying you a beer, but appreciate your time.
I appreciate it too. Thank you.